Hi, this is Colin Goebel, and this is step 4 of the bouncy ball demonstration. What we're going to do in this case is revert back to using one bouncing ball, but I am going to introduce a block to the game. And to show you what I mean, we'll start the game here, and you'll notice the ball bounces down. We're playing pretty much a game of breakout, but when the ball hits the block, we need the ball to bounce off the block and we need the block to be destroyed. So this video is intended to show you how to stop the block, how to detect the collision between the ball and the block. We're going to need to bounce the ball off the block, and we're going to need to destroy the block. Let's look at the code that does that. Okay, as always, we include dartgdk.h. We set our window height and window width as before. This time we've got 3 images. There's a ball image, which I've numbered as 1, a paddle image, which I've numbered as 2, and a block image, which I've numbered as 3. We've also got some sprites here. We've got a ball sprite. There's only one of them this time, remember, not an array. So I've numbered the ball sprite 1, the paddle sprite is 2, and the block sprite is 3. No changes to the sync rate, setting the window size, and so on, initializing the timer. We load the ball image and give it a color, a transparent color of black. We load the paddle image here and give it a transparent color of 6665.0. And we load the block image, and that also has a transparent color of 6665.0. So we load the 3 images and set their transparent colors. Okay, so we set the right margin and the ball initially is at the position 200. X is 200, Y is 150. That's the X and Y coordinate of the beginning of the ball when the game begins. The right hand margin we've set to 440. The bottom margin we've set to 340. That's the position at which the ball will bounce off the right of the screen and the bottom of the screen. The ball initially goes in a random downward direction, and that's the code that does that. So when the game starts, the ball goes downwards towards the paddle, and that's the initial velocity of the ball and the coordinate and the trigonometry that does that, which we've discussed earlier in these videos. So having place the ball, we'll render the ball on the screen, same code as before. The paddle is in the same initial location. We'll place the paddle on the screen. And this particular block has an X coordinate of 200. It's 200 pixels from the left, and it's 50 pixels down. The Y coordinate is 50. So it's 50 pixels down from the top of the screen. Now we're not actually going to delete the block or destroy the block when it's hit. We're going to mark it as dead or out of the game, if you will. And so associated with the block is a Boolean called isAlive, and we're going to set it to true. We'll call the block alive if it's still in play, and if isAlive is set to false, then the block is no longer active, is no longer in play. And then we'll render the block. So we render that image with the sprite number associated with SPR block, and we'll render it at the position X block, Y block, which we initialized 2 or 3 instructions earlier. Okay, here's the main loop of the program, while loop GDK down here, and the loop ends here, so it's a little bit bigger than before. We set the background to gray, no change there. We change the position of the ball according to the velocity vector of the ball, no change there. If the ball hits the right-hand side of the screen, we reverse its speed in the X direction. If the ball hits the top or the bottom of the screen, we reverse its speed in the Y direction. We move the paddle depending on whether the user has the right or the left key depressed. We detect a collision between the ball and the paddle exactly the same way as we did before. So this code didn't change. It's exactly the same code to bounce the ball off the paddle. And now we have to find out if the ball has collided with a block. Now, the first thing we need to know is if the block isn't alive, then a collision with the block doesn't mean anything. So we'll say if is alive is true, then the ball has collided with a block that is alive. And in that case, well, excuse me, if the block's alive, then we'll see if we've collided with the block. So we've got a collision here between the ball and the block. And if the block is alive, then we need to hide the block, because once we've collided with a block, the user no longer sees that block. So we use the dark GDK function called dbHideSprite to hide the block. We're going to set isAlive to false, because once we've collided with a live block, the block is no longer alive. And we have to reverse, we have to bounce the ball off the block. So we reverse the speed in the vertical direction. So this is the code which detects if there's been a collision with the block, and if, or I should say, this is the code that determines if there is a collision with a block which is alive. And if there is a collision with a live block, we did two things. We set the isAlive value for that block to false, and we changed the direction of the ball so that it bounced off the block. Having done that, we render the ball, we render the paddle, and of course the last thing we have to do is we only render the block sprite. The code there is quite simple, but we only render the block sprite if the block is alive. So that one we wrap in an isAlive if statement so that it's conditional on the block being alive. And nothing else in this application changed. So once again, here we have the game operating where the ball bounces around off the paddle, and as and when and if it hits the block should, and there we go. The block is no longer alive, the block is no longer rendered, it vanishes, and the block and the ball bounced off the block. Thank you.